All right. All right. Well, welcome everyone. What's up? My name is Nico, and today I'm going to be interviewing Perry Holloman, who is an international teacher and lecturer of the healing arts, is a Gestalt facilitator, and senior faculty member and teacher at the Esalen Institute. And today we're going to be discussing something called the rule of threes, which is something that he uses in his teachings all the time in order to be an effective communicator. And it's something that's super interesting to me that I think everyone could take a lot of value from. So, yeah, today we're here with Perry Holloman, also my dad. And so, Dad, what is the basic idea of the rule of threes?
Well, there are a couple of things that are important to understand about the rule of three in order to use it effectively. And the first, from a Gestalt perspective, is that we recognize that the human mind orders experience in terms of patterns. And imagine for a moment that all that we had in life and experience were two dimensions, either height and width or width and depth, but we didn't have all three, height, width, and depth together. What these three dimensions offer is a depth and a richness of experience where a pattern can be experienced in a way that that's just richer and fuller than if one has just one or two dimensions by themselves. So the rule of three reflects itself already in the way that the universe is organized into height, width, and depth in terms of our perception. We need to have at least three dimensions for complex patterns to manifest and be perceivable. However, if you add a fourth dimension, it becomes very, very difficult for people to understand, which is one of the reasons that unless you're very, very smart, it's really difficult to understand Albert Einstein's work, right? So three dimensions is the simplest form in which we can appreciate complex pattern. And so the rule of three in this regard, in terms of the way the universe itself is organized into height, width, and depth, offers richness of experience and simplicity at the same time. So that's the great power of the rule of three. It gives you enough information, but not too much.
Right. Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Did that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So
Yeah.
how you said the rule of threes is kind of like built in and to an extent into the way that we perceive reality. So what are some of the ways that you experience and see the rule of threes in the world?
Well, we can look throughout history. Some of the great pieces of information that have been transmitted in speeches, for instance, Shakespeare, one of the great rule of three oratory examples in Shakespeare is the phrase friends, Romans, countrymen. Another one is from Thomas Jefferson, who, when he was writing helping write the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, the ideas of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We see in Christianity that they've created the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Phrases like blood, sweat, tears, and what we attempt to teach children to keep them safe. You approach a street, what do? You stop, you look, you listen. And if we're in an emergency, what do? We dial 911. There's a reason why these bits of information, these very important bits of information, are transmitted in segments of three, because they give you enough information, but not too much. So it has depth and simplicity at the same time.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that again makes a ton of sense, and it's really interesting to see. I'd never thought of how all those examples are so rich, but also like just simple and easy, like the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Is that correct?
Right.
Those.
That was Thomas Jefferson.
Okay, nice. Yeah.
And
So,
it's the basis of the Constitution of the United States, right?
right.
And so we can see how these really complex meta structures like nation states in this example are organized around concepts delivered in the rule of three. Another really interesting one is the way the military organizes itself.
Mm.
There is an organizational philosophy that 1/3 of the military is planning for deployment, 1/3 of the military is actually deployed, and 1/3 of the military is recuperating from deployment, all at the same time. That's a basic concept around which the military is organized. So the rule of three, you can see it in complex organizations, in nation states. You can even see it in the way that comedians organize jokes. There's a basic thesis of the joke, right? And
Mm.
then there's a narrative. And then there's something that's counter to the narrative, which makes it very funny.
Mm.
And this is the way that comedians organize their material, rule of threes.
Yeah,
It's
it's so
really
wild.
amazing to see how it permeates every aspect of human life. And it's because it's a basic organizing principle of the human psyche, both in terms of how the human psyche understands pattern and the ability of the psyche to retain information. We can't retain more than 3 pieces of new information at one time. So
Mm.
any good teacher will know, or for example, when I'm teaching Esalen massage, I never teach people in any one demonstration more than 3 new moves at a time, because if I
Mm.
add a fourth, the retention level goes way down, and my work gets much harder because people are pulling me over to their table saying, what did you do? What was that? I can't
Yeah.
remember. And if I keep it
Mm.
to 3, my work is that much easier because people remember it and repeat it.
Mm.
Another way in the classroom that this is exemplified is that I know that I have to repeat any one piece of new information at least 3 times. If I
Mm.
just do it once or I do it twice, people don't grasp it. It's got to be at least 3 times. And then I've got to be prepared to give at least 3 examples
Mm.
of what it is that one piece of information means in order for people to be able to fill it out and understand the depth and the richness of what it is that I'm saying.
Mm.
So other examples that we see in really important teachings are, for example, the work of Karl Marx and Hegel were organized around the rule of three, around the idea of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, dialectical thought, right? The
Mm.
basic thesis that then is challenged by the antithesis, and movement in society beginning to happen when thesis and antithesis interact with each other and create a synthesis that takes the best ideas from both and moves forward.
Mm.
These are all examples of how the rule of three works, not just in the human mind, but in society and culture as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah. What this brings up for me too is thinking about how effective the rule of threes is in teaching it. makes it really easy for me to understand in retrospect why my high school experience was so mentally frazzling for me. Even though I was able to do well, I still I still felt like my brain was kind of turning into mush on a daily basis because we'd be essentially taking 6 to 7 classes a day, and in every class we'd be learning like 15 to 100 new pieces of information, and and we just have to remember it up until the point where we took the test, and then no one remembers anything. There's no like actual knowledge retention. So that kind of segues into how do you think like teachers and people trying to become more effective communicators could start to implement this in their own work in order to be more effective?
Well, when the problem that most teachers run into is imagine that one is teaching something really complex, like physics or calculus or, um, you know, uh, uh, in some kind of a branch of philosophy where one's trying to teach the work of Karl Marx. And um, the important thing for teachers is to recognize that in any given lecture that they're given,
Mm,
they need to come up with the basic idea that they want to transmit in one given lecture, and they need to break it down into no more than three distinct, discrete pieces of information.
mm,
Okay. And if you try to go to a fourth, you will notice that the retention level of the information on the part of the students uh, begins to drastically drop off. So yes, in fact, in any given lecture, there are probably 7, 10, 20, 30 points that one can make about, the work of Karl Marx, or how to understand differential or integral equations. But what a good teacher will do is, in this segment, what are the three things that I can teach that cohere together, right? What are the three things that I can teach in this given lecture that will make sense and get the point across? And so what one needs to do is one needs to understand, have enough command of one's material that in any given unit of teaching, what we can do is pick just three things that we're going to focus on. We're not going to ask our students to try to grasp more than three pieces of new information at any given time. So it requires a teacher first to really know what it is that they're teaching. One of my favorite teachers, so most influential teachers, her name was Janet Zuckerman. She put her hand on my shoulder, and when she was teaching me how to teach, said, "Perry, never try to teach something that you don't understand. Never try to teach something you don't understand. Your audience is going to eat you alive if you go in there and don't know what you're talking about."
mm,
And then keep it simple. Now, she didn't know about the rule of threes, but the statement, keep it simple, guided me to an understanding of the rule of threes, that it has to be enough information to have richness, depth, and breadth, right? Height, width, and depth, like the way the universe is organized.
yeah.
And yet it can't be so much that it becomes overwhelming to the human mind, right? So it's got to have both things. It's got to have richness, depth, and breadth, but it can't be so much that it becomes overwhelming, right? It needs to be enough that it remains exciting, stimulating, that students have an enthusiasm about what they're learning because they can grasp it, right? If
Mm,
a student doesn't grasp something, and to feel dumb and deficient, and the central nervous system simply shuts down.
mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, Yeah, it totally does. And a question that arises too is if you're giving a presentation or lecture of some sort on a topic and you've broken it down into three discrete items that you want to discuss, like is it okay to have a lot of sub points that all point back to that discrete thing, or like how complex do you make each one of those discrete points to keep it digestible?
Okay, well, let's go back to Thomas Jefferson. He was attempting to persuade what was about to become the United States of America. What is important about this great experiment we want to embark upon? Because the stakes were really high. The greatest military in the world was coming after a group of people that were considered rebels in the United States, this territory that England had claimed as its own. And Jefferson put forward the ideas of why this is important is we want life, we want to be able to live,
Mm,
we want liberty, we want the ability to choose our own destiny, right?
mm,
And we want to be able to pursue happiness. We want to be happy, content. We want our lives to be full of meaning, right?
mm,
And so he picked the three very powerful, he could have said much more about what's important about this American experiment, but he chose three really powerful categories. And it is possible within each of those categories to define life in three different ways, to
mm,
define liberty in three ways, to describe the pursuit of happiness in three ways. You
mm,
see, so each of these categories can be broken down to help people understand, but also according to the rule of three. If you describe life in 5 or 6 different ways, people will just forget what you said afterwards. If you describe liberty with too much complexity, people won't retain it. It's something that with the rule of three, it's not just that people intellectually remember, but they have a feel for, they develop a feel for what's being said, what's being taught. They feel it in their guts, in their hearts, and they don't just understand it in their minds.
mm. Well said. Yeah, that's powerful. I like how it kind of you can kind of break each one of the 3 points into just little three fractals, and each like three kind of empowers the next level of itself. That's awesome. Um, how did you come upon this um, after your mentor that you mentioned? Did you say her name was Janet?
Janet Zuckerman,
Janet?
yeah, she didn't know about the rule of three, but she always said, it's simple, stupid, right? When she
Right.
was teaching her students, she would teach them to keep their material clear, keep it very simple. Now, where I was introduced directly to the rule of three there was a very well-known international business consultant named George Kohlreiser. He still comes to Esalen, and he wrote a great book called The Hostage at the Table.
Mm,
And one of the things that he taught us in that class, one of the foundations of his success was because he was able to teach according to the rule of three. And he organized all of the material that he presented to us according to the rule of three. And
mm,
he was the first person to uh, open my eyes to the fact that the human mind is organized to think and retain and organize material into patterns according to the rule of three.
mm,
And then after I studied with George for a while, I realized that I could organize everything that I teach according to the rule of three. And what I noticed when I started doing that was my seminars started being more successful, more people wanted to come, more people wanted to participate, people would start speaking, using word of mouth to get other people to come. And one of the reasons has been, is that I organize the material according to the rule of three, and people leave the seminars feeling like they've really learned something.
Mm.
And that's, of course, what they're looking for.
Yeah, of course. And naturally, they'd be so much more inclined to spread that positive word of mouth if they feel like all levels of their understanding have really been nourished by that rule of threes. Yeah,
Right.
that's epic.
So let me give you just a little example.
Okay.
I was asked to organize a very complex piece of curriculum, the Esalen massage teacher training, which had never been done before. So when I sat down and I thought, okay, how am I going to organize this very complex material? I went to the rule of three and created a triangular diagram about the way that people needed to think about understanding and presenting information. And I called the basics knowledge, organization, and articulation. So I went back to what Janet Zuckerman taught me, knowledge. You got to know what it is that you're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have to organize that knowledge into simple enough morsels that people can retain it, right? So you've got knowledge, you've got the organization of that knowledge, and then you have to deliver that organized knowledge as articulated teaching, right? So that's an example of the rule of three and how to teach people how to organize any kind of a lecture, any kind of a presentation. You've got to know what you're talking about. You've got to organize that knowledge, and you got to be able to articulate that knowledge, right? Now, each one of those steps can be broken down also into three subcategories, right? And then what I always tell people is when you're teaching anything, we're not and just articulating, but we want to give people an actual experience. And so I tell them, you need to create three exercises around any teaching where you get people experiencing in three different ways what it is that you've just taught, right? So that's an example of the rule of threes and how I began to create a foundation for this very complex teaching of teachers project that I was given. And I could go on and on. I mean, the rule of threes goes throughout the curriculum. There are three basic knowledge areas: teaching of massage skills, the development of what I call group field skills, and then the development of marketing skills. So there are three basic pillars upon which the whole training is organized. So the rule of threes, not to belabor the point, is evident everywhere. And the training program has been, as a result, very successful, and people are going out and teaching their own workshops now, and that's just after two of the three segments. So
nice.
Hope that this is all making
Yeah. I think one last question that I'd have before we kind of come to a denouement is how do you feel about giving presentations that have less than 3 points? Does it subtract from the richness, or are you for it? Like if you want to just make one main point or maybe two?
Well, that is better than more than three.
Okay.
Right? So it is definitely possible to organize material in less than 3 points.
Mm.
And so the answer to that is yes, one can do that. However, when one looks at the most successful, the most rich yet simple presentations that have a balance between breadth, depth, richness, and simplicity, you will find almost always that they are organized according to the rule of threes. Right?
Sweet. Yeah. Wow. Well, I'll start keeping my eye open more to spot how that naturally occurs in life, and it's super fun to and enlightening to see where it already has been occurring, like under all of our noses, without us really like registering how powerful that number really is. So yeah, in terms of
It's
yeah,
everywhere.
please. No, go ahead.
We have three great religious traditions
Mm.
on the planet. We see it everywhere. See it everywhere.
Yeah, another one that I had never really internalized as well. That's amazing, honestly. So if
Yeah.
I would say this is probably a good place for people to kind of just digest and internalize all the information, the power of the rule of threes. And is there, if people want more information on connecting with you or your trainings or anything like that, do you want to, is there anything you want to put out there in terms of kind of plugging the stuff that you're up to?
Yeah, sure. People can come to deepbodywork.com for more information about upcoming trainings. For people that are international students and German speaking, we have a website, esselenmassage.de. And one can also check out the Esalen Institute, Esalen.org website, and the fintorn.org website for seminars that we do internationally. One more for Asian students is bodyuniversal.com. Bodyuniversal.com. I will be doing work in Japan this fall and next year, and people can check out what I'm doing there.
Sweet. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been very enlightening and fun to learn more about this, and I'm excited to start implementing it in everything I do, everything I share. So it's been very informative, and I'm very grateful for your time.
Thank you.